Appreciate you all being here tonight. I'm Brian Thomas. I'm a small business area manager for Capital One, responsible for Suffolk County. I have 10 small business bankers that are out there driving business into the bank. If those small business bankers, please raise your hand for a quick second so people know who you are. I'd like you all to feel free to reach out to them or speak to them at some point tonight. What my team is responsible for doing is attracting small business owners into the bank. We help advise customers on how to improve their cash flow, and we assist them with capital access issues or needs. Last week, to give you guys an idea, put it in context, I'll give you a little story. I met with a couple of gentlemen who had a fantastic business model. Their business model was to sell cable boxes to the Pakistani population or ethnic group. And they provide channels that they cannot get anywhere else offered through cable TV or any other means, direct TV. So after meeting with them, or while meeting with them, we identified their challenges. Their challenges were that it was taking them a long time to collect payment from their customers. And they also had much of their money, their cash, tied up in inventory. They're selling 1,000 boxes a month. It's great. The challenge is they couldn't purchase any more and make more profit. In addition, they're wiring a ton of money overseas, and it was absorbing a lot of their profit. So after meeting with them, what we were able to do was sell them a platform that allowed them to do wires online from their office at a much cheaper price than they pay in the branch. In addition, we set them up with merchant processing, where they now can collect payments from their customers and get next day funding, which was fantastic. On top of that, we set them up with a $250,000 line of credit. These guys have a great business model, and the chances of their success are tenfold now that we've given them the ability to free up their cash flow and get access to capital. So I just want to give you a little context as far as what we're responsible for doing, because at the end of the day, our products and services are great, but there's so many different banks for you guys to choose from. So I want you guys to think about whenever you come across a customer, if not yourselves or somebody you work with, if they collect payments if they collect payments through Visa or MasterCard, or if they have a need to raise capital so that they can improve their positioning, I want you to think of Capital One Bank. I want you to think Brian Thomas. So really excited to have you guys here today. You have a great presentation coming from a close friend, JC Maldonado from BizGro Partners. And I'm going to take a second just to read his brief bio, but I'm always very excited about having him here because he has so much experience. And the topic that he's going to discuss tonight, it applies to everything you guys do. Whether you're buying a car or you're negotiating a $10 million takeover acquisition. So JC has his law degree from Fordham University. But instead of practicing law, he decided to go in business for himself. So he's the founder of BizGro Partners, a company that's dedicated to helping small and medium-sized businesses grow, expand, and transition. He's been involved in hundreds of business deals as principal, intermediary, agent, and mediator. And he's intensely studied negotiations as a discipline and how it impacts small business performance. So I think you guys are going to get a great show tonight. Again, if you have any questions with regard to banking, please feel free to reach out to me or anybody that raised their hand earlier. So without further ado, Mr. JC Maldonado.
Good evening. Good evening. I don't know if this mic works, but if it doesn't work, I might scream. Brian, that was an excellent introduction. I can't wait to hear what I have to say. Can't wait. So either or, quick, I just want a couple of thank yous out of the way. I'd like to thank my partner, Sam Maldonado. He's my partner. BizGro Partners. Now, what's unique about Sam is I'm 35 years old, now going on 36, and I started in business at 22 years old, and Sam was 19 years old. And one of the disciplines that we decided to master, and we both kind of collectively studied this discipline was negotiations, because it was the one discipline that helped us survive. It was the one discipline that helped us command respect. And we decided that if we could master this discipline, we could do well. And that's what happened. So Sam Maldonado, round of applause. 19 years old, by the way, when he started. That's great, 15. Introduce her to Sam. Second introduction, just want to thank you, Martin Hoffenberg. Take a good look at this man. Look, raise your hand a little. Marty is a principal and serves as our chair of BizGro Partners. This man's amazing. He's got experience as an attorney. He's a practicing attorney. He also has real deal experience as an entrepreneur, and he became a partner in BizGro Partners in 2011. He's been very helpful and has helped us grow the business. So round of applause for Marty as well. A couple more thank yous. I'd like to thank Brian Thomas.
Oh.
Yes. Capital One Bank. I promised Brian that I would not teach anyone how to negotiate with banks. So that was my promise to Brian. But Brian, this is our second event. We did an event in October 2013 on capital raising. So we might do some more events, but he attended this negotiation seminar in July of last year. So you insisted, right, that we do this seminar here.
I think I won that negotiation.
There you go. And he won a negotiation as a result of the seminar that we threw. So give it up to Brian. Last but not least, Chris Johnson, our video guy. Chris is in the social media and the video business. He's like the paparazzi of BizGro. But he really does do a good job. He's helped us develop our social media, and he's very talented. So give it up to Chris. All right, I'd like to start by posing a question to the audience. And I want to get a little feedback because I think it's important, especially with this discipline of negotiations that makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable because in business. So I'd like to pose a question. Who in the audience received training in negotiations in high school? Wow, 0. Who took a negotiations course in college? Now, we got some people who are like super educated in the audience. Who took a negotiations course at the master's level? So this is very interesting. So 0. Now, how many people in the audience own their own business? They're a principal. They're a CEO. They own their own business. All right. How many people advise business owners and they typically are involved in negotiations, even not as a principal, but they're an advisor? Raise your hand. A lot of negotiations, huh? So at the level of high school and college and even at the master's level, we didn't receive any training. But in business, who would agree that all you do is negotiate? Who would agree with that? Who is in a negotiations-intensive business where they feel like every day they're in some sort of negotiation? Raise your hand.
Does marriage count?
You know, it's interesting you say that. Does marriage count? One day, she or he says, I do. 5 years later, she says, I don't. Isn't that the essence of a divorce? I don't. Who's been through that? Welcome to the club. 3 out of 50 raise their hand, but I suspect that it's like 30 out of 50 compared to the recent statistics. It's funny, I went through traffic today, and I haven't been in Long Island. I think if I had been in Long Island, I've been like couple hundred people here. I just haven't been in Long Island lately. And I'm in the traffic, and I'm thinking that I'm from New Jersey. I actually live in New Jersey. And I'm thinking that, wow, maybe my visa expired. I don't think I have a visa in Long Island no more, so I got to get a green card, Brian. All right, real quick, I'm going to cover this topic. We're going to talk for the next hour and a half, 2 hours. I hope that's not too long. Hopefully my talk is like the latest female fashion. It's enough to cover the body of the subject, but short enough to make it interesting. So that's my goal here. But I want to get a little feedback from the audience. How would you define a negotiation? What's a negotiation? What's a negotiation? How do you even know you're in a negotiation?
An offer and a counter offer for a specific service in return for another service or good.
An offer, a counter offer for a specific service. Any other audience feedback? How would you define a negotiation? Anyone is?
Go with any place where you've got two points of view, so you're looking to convince somebody to meet you at least halfway.
Okay. That's interesting as well. Anybody else? Like to get one more?
Give and take.
What? You? Give or take?
Yeah, give and take.
Give and take. And that defines the negotiation. All right. I want everyone to write down a definition of negotiations. For the capital 1, you have your number 2 pencil. And you can write this down. Here's a definition of negotiations that I got from a gentleman by the name of John Patterson. Who's ever heard of John Patterson? Who's John Patterson? The person who raised their hand up. Now I'm going to test you. Who's John Patterson? He's a famous author, but John Patterson is considered to be the father of American sales. He owned this big cash register business, and he used to sell cash registers in the late 1800s. And he's considered to be the father of American sales. And he defined negotiations as the following. He said, negotiations is when you bargain value in your favor in a manner that's acceptable to the other side. So get that quote, very famous quote. John Patterson, when you bargain value in a manner that's favorable to you, that's acceptable to the other side. So let's talk about what I'm going to talk about here in this little program here. I'm going to talk about the mental inner game. I'm going to show you that 70% of the negotiation, now it's not the total entire ball of wax, but 70% of the negotiation is in how you think about yourself and how you think about life. And we're going to talk about the components of the mental inner game. Now, it's not the total game because you need to develop skills that actually complement your inner psychology. But we're going to talk about the mental inner game. The second thing we're going to talk about is the strategic setup. If you set up the game, if you set up the negotiation in a certain way, you're going to make your negotiations a lot more effective. You're going to actually be able, remember this John Patterson definition, favorable to you but acceptable to the other side, meaning the relationship is maintained. It's acceptable to the other side, but it's favorable to you. So we'll talk about how you strategically set that up. And if you know negotiations as a discipline, you oftentimes don't have to negotiate. So that's another concept that we're going to talk about today. Finally, we're going to talk about The gambits and the counter gambits. Who has ever heard of the word gambit? Who's heard of that word? Now, what is that usually related? When people talk about gambits and counter gambits, what sport or game are they typically talking about? Anyone know? It's the game of chess. That is a famous word, gambit. When you say gambit and counter gambit, you're usually talking about the game of chess. And what's chess? It's a negotiation when you really think about it. You're negotiating for positioning. You're negotiating for power. That's gambits and counter gambits. So we're going to talk about the gambits and the counter gambits in negotiation as if it was a game of chess. All right. We went through the thank yous. Here's a question. Why do you think, now, everyone here, I mean, I question the audience. They either own a business, they're advisors to a business. Why is it important to really sharpen up these skills? I want to get a little feedback from the audience. Why is it important to be a competent negotiator? Who has the answer for that? Who has some perspective on that? Why is negotiation so important? Why did you even come here?
If you don't win at your negotiation, you lose.
You lose what?
It depends on what you're negotiating for. It could be money. It could be the love of your life.
Oh, so it encompasses all aspects of life.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll talk about that. That's very important. Brian, do you have your hand up?
It works right out of my mouth.
Anyone else? Why is negotiation so important as a business discipline? What drove you here? Half the people in here I've never even seen. That means just on the strength of an email, you're here. So why? Why is negotiation so important?
Very much like what Keith said, it could be the difference between a successful business and a business that goes belly up.
Also, you're actually relating it to the success of a business and whether it succeeds or not succeeds. So what you're saying is that if the principals are competent negotiators, they have a better chance of success.
Absolutely.
And if they're poor negotiators, they may go out of business.
I mean, they might skate by if they're good in business and they know what they're doing. They might skate by, but their business won't necessarily thrive.
They won't prosper.
Not necessarily. No.
Yes.
Because there's lots of competition out there.
Lots of competition out there.
You have to be-
So how does that relate to negotiations?
So you can get the business over someone else.
I almost saw a negotiation internally between them. They talked, they talked first before they even said. But that's right. So, yes.
I was just going to say, also negotiation is universal to almost anything. Everything you do, you're kind of negotiating your way through getting what you want in a certain way. I mean, every action you take in a way, you sort of negotiate your environment, the structure in a way that's better for you. What you do, whether it's business, life, love,
Everything. So really, negotiations is really an important discipline. All right, good.
just don't call it negotiation.
All right, I'm going to tell you maybe some three reasons why I think you need to be a competent negotiator. Now, remember, when my brother and I started, I was 22, he was 19. We were okay in sales. The reality is, and we were okay in networking. The reality is, if I was 21, 22 years old and I came to an event like this, there wouldn't really be a lot in common I had with people. Now that I'm like 35, 36, I could talk to people about life. But when you're 22, 23, wait, you're 15, right? That's unbelievable. You're at a head start right here. But if you're 22, 19, 20, 23, 24, one of the disadvantages was, well, how do I connect with people? So from a networking standpoint, there's really not much I could do. But what we learned is, hey, we study this discipline. While it's fair game, everybody has to play at the same playing field. So if we get really good at this, we could really do well. So that's why we made the decision to do this. But there are three reasons why I think you need to make a commitment to being a world-class negotiator. World-class. I mean, make a commitment. Now, this is a skill. No one's born a world-class negotiator. No one's born. This is all skill set driven. In fact, there are different personality types where their personality type are all useful in negotiations. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So it has nothing to do with personality. whether you are a competent negotiator or not a competent negotiator, all depends on your skill sets. So here are the 3 reasons. The first reason is, and this is really true, we're going to talk about this, you make more money negotiating than any other discipline. More than sales, more than negotiating, more than networking. Good thing I don't have any networking gurus here in the audience. They didn't come today. But I'm going to talk about why negotiating is actually the opposite of networking and how that works. But you make more money negotiating than any other discipline. And here's the reason why. In fact, to the audience, why do you think you make so much money negotiating? I want you to think about it. Why is negotiations, why does it lead to so much profit? Think about it, from your experience, even from the times where you made some money.
Because if you're negotiating, you negotiate the best price for you, so therefore there's more money in your pocket. So if you go around negotiating good, you're just almost putting money in your pocket. And if you pay more, you're not listening.
I'm going to take your comment. Actually, your comment is very true. Let's get a good deal. There's a comment you made. Your pocket. A negotiated dollar is a bottom line profit dollar. It's a bottom line profit dollar. That's why it's so profitable. When you negotiate, and you negotiate successfully, every time you negotiate a bottom line profit dollar. All right? Which means there's a lot at stake. And so if you can deploy strong negotiation skills, then you're adding a lot more to the bottom line. So a great example, you look at a car, and the car is $30,000. And you can get the price down to $25,000. Right? Now the salesman on the other side was perfectly okay with selling the car to you for $30,000, right? But you was able to get the price down to $25,000, and you was able to do it in 1 hour. How much money did you make in that 1 hour? $5,000. You made $5,000 in 1 hour of negotiations, right? 1 hour. Now, how many activities, from the audience, how many activities could you engage in where you make $5,000 in 1 hour? Think about that. Right? So the reality is you will never make more money in any other activity than negotiating. Right? It's a real critical competence skill that one must hone in business, because you can make so much money. You get down a price, something's $250,000, you get it down to $175,000. You make $75,000, and maybe it took 10 hours. But $75,000 in 10 hours. Think about that. In 10 hours, $75,000 in 10 hours. How much is that per hour? $7,500. I don't care if you're a brain surgeon and you're the top brain surgeon in the U.S. $7,500 an hour is a lot of money. So you never make more money than negotiating any other skill. Now, a couple other things. It's the one skill that really encompasses all areas of your life. We talked about the wife or the husband, that I do and I don't. Who knows people who have been in some horrifying divorces, or maybe they've themselves been in horrifying divorces? Raise your hand. This is not a group therapy session. We're not like a landmark or anything like that. So I won't do that. But, I mean, when you think about it, right? There was a study done on divorces, and the study that I looked at, and the study stated that most divorces usually are a result of poor relationship management skills. And I attribute that to the negotiations. How you set up the relationship in the first place usually resulted in the fall of the relationship itself. And it's related to negotiations. So really, all areas of your life are a negotiation. And I think the consequences of not developing negotiation skills could be disastrous. Now, we define negotiations. Now, John Patterson defined the negotiation as, very simply, bargaining value in a way that's favorable to you, that's acceptable to the other side. So what I want you to do is take that number 2 pencil, Capital One provided you, and I'm going to share with you 3 rules of negotiations. And what's going to happen is, as I go through this presentation, I want you to kind of go through these 3 rules. And when you come out of here, at least you can kind of, think about the negotiation cycle as in terms of these 3 rules. So here's rule number 1. Always be willing to walk away from a deal. He who is able to walk away wins. That is the number 1 pressure point in all negotiations, is your walkaway power. And we'll talk about how to increase your walkaway power a little later on in this presentation. All right, 2. Now here's the second one, is a little bit more difficult to fathom in that it involves a lot more emotions. All right? Always analyze a situation or the value in a situation at the given moment that it's presented to you. Analyze a situation in terms of the value you receive at any given moment. Now, I'll tell you the problem, what happens, or the struggle, or the thing that people struggle with. What they do is, they always think in terms of the time and the money that they spent prior to any given moment. And what happens is that they stay in relationships that are not really good for them, whether it be business or personal. Then it's not really good for them. But because of the time and the money that they've spent up to that point, they feel a little bit more obligated to stay in the relationship. Who can relate to that a little bit? Right? You spend a lot of time. You spend a lot of money. And because of that, you have an obligation to feel that you need to stay in that relationship. And you fail to analyze whether the relationship is good for you at the given moment. So that's a second rule of negotiation. Always analyze the relationship in terms of how it stands at any given moment. Forget the past. Forget how much time you spent, and forget how much money you've spent. Always look at it from a standpoint of, does it make sense today? What made sense in April 2014 does not make sense in March 2012, or vice versa. So that's an important negotiation principle. So 1, always be willing to demonstrate walkaway power. And we're going to talk about how to increase that walkaway power as we go through the strategies. And then 2, always analyze the situation as it stands today. Right? A very important principle in negotiations. Now, rule number 3. Now, this is a little controversial, but I'm going to say it, and this is what I teach, and you're either going to accept it or not. I'm against win-win negotiating. Totally against it. I think it's a fallacy. I think it puts you in a bad position. Win-win negotiation. Now, this is what everyone preaches, win-win negotiation. We got to do a win-win deal. Stephen Covey. Who's heard of Stephen Covey? The author of 7 highly effective habits of successful people. There you go. He came out with a business, The 8th Habit. He just came out of nowhere. I forgot the 7. There was 7. There's an 8th. Good book title. Upsell. I like Stephen Covey, very good author. But he was quoted as saying, I won't do a deal unless it works for me and it works for the other side too. Right? This utopian idea of win-win. Right? Now, I'm not against win-win. Sometimes win-win works. But what you'll find is, and what we're going to show you, is that there's different paradigms people come from. And there's a lot of people that don't come from a win-win paradigm. So if you're coming with a win-win paradigm and the other side doesn't have a win-win paradigm, it might not work. And I could tell you at 23, 24, 25 years old, when you meet people, you don't really have credibility. People don't really look at you as real. So win-win didn't work at 25, 26, or 22, or 23 years old. Win-win didn't work. It just simply didn't work, even though I was very familiar with win-win. So win-win is kind of like this concept of, let's look at an orange, right? And let's just say it's me and my brother, Sam, and we're negotiating. And there's an orange. Win-win says that, hey, Sam, you might like the juice. And JC, what you really want is the rind, the peel. So, Sam, you just want the juice. JC, you just want the peel, so let's work it out. Now, that's great if Sam wants the juice and I want the rind, right? Maybe I want the rind. I was actually looking in the internet, why would someone want the peel? And they say that you could use the peel to clean your house. And you could use the peel to prevent pests from invading your house, right? Or you could use the peel from avoiding water stains. You could actually clean water stains more effectively with the peel, right? And the juice, you could make orange juice, right? You could just make orange juice. So I want the rind, I want the peel, Sam wants the juice. And in some cases, that's okay. But the problem is, if me and Sam were negotiating for an orange, most of the time, Sam wants the orange, I want to sell the orange. I'm not interested in the juice, he's not interested in the rind. So win-win negotiating in that sense doesn't work. And if you say, let's cut it in half, he says, hell no, I'm not cutting no orange. And if you ask me, well, why don't we cut the orange in half? And I say, no. So where does win-win negotiating go at that point? So that's the problem with win-win negotiating. Good.
At that point, the negotiation talks could then go on to talks about merging or doing a co-venture. It wouldn't be so much as a negotiation as a moving forward together.
The problem is, again, your win-win could work in certain cases, but if you have 100 cases, only 10 of them work in the win-win, where he wants the rind, I want the juice, I want the juice, he wants the rind. But in 90 cases, I want to buy the orange, the full orange, and he wants to sell the full orange, and I want to buy it at a certain price, and he wants to sell it at a certain price. And if you said to Sam, sell it, let's compromise, I want to buy the orange for $12, and he wants to sell the orange, I want to buy the orange for $6, he wants to sell the orange for $12, we have a conflict. So win-win negotiating in that case, unless we're willing to compromise, doesn't work. So the part that I'm going to teach you is a method of negotiating similar to the John Patterson principle. The John Patterson principle is bargain deals in your favor that's acceptable to the other side. That's the part that we're going to talk about. All right? Now, so those are the three reasons why I think negotiations is critical. Now, a couple more things. What's the core function of negotiations? Now, I see negotiations as the martial arts because this is a discipline that makes people feel uncomfortable. We're going to talk about why that is. But look at it like the martial arts. Who would agree that if you were a karate master, you could kill someone real quick? Who would agree with that? If you were a black belt or higher, you can kill somebody real quick. Raise your hand. All right. Who here is a black belt in karate? And you can kill someone real quick?
It just gives you technique and discipline.
Okay, there you go. So good point. Now, if you wanted to, you can kill somebody, right? You carry a gun. I like that.
He doesn't need to be here.
Let me introduce Arnaldo Salinas. I have to better introduce you after that. Arnaldo owns a real deal professional security company. Multi-million-dollar business, actually. Does government contract work, does executive protection work. Actually has a presence in Mexico, right? So that's why he has a gun. But he's an entrepreneur, and he owns this company that makes a lot of money. And I think he's right. The martial arts, right? If you use it for violent purposes, you could kill somebody, right? But that's not the real purpose of martial arts. The purpose of martial arts, as you alluded to, was discipline, right? That there's a personal development component to martial arts. It makes you a better person, right? It keeps you in better shape, right? It helps you, it brings structure to your life, right? And that's what negotiations is about. Negotiations could be used for good and evil purposes. And part of this program is to kind of learn how to deal with the evil people as well. Learn how to play this game. That's part of what this program's about. But that you as a person, I mean, you're not really using it for evil purposes. Who remembers The Karate Kid as a movie? And if you remember, you had a couple of things. In that movie, you had the Cobra Kai, right? And you had a methodology of teaching karate and how to use violence. And then you had Miyagi, who was teaching Daniel on how to use karate as a way to develop himself and defend himself. So that's a perfect example. Anyone who could do the Miyagi imitation, stand forth now. But that's what it's about. So that's negotiations. Many of the greatest scams in the world were actually conducted by master negotiators. We'll talk a little bit about that later. So, all right, so now we're going to get into this. And here's a question for the audience. How do you know you're in a negotiation? How do you know that you're in a situation? You're not in a sales situation anymore. You're not in a networking situation anymore. How do you know you're actually in a negotiation?
Where do you put your money down?
When you put your money down.
When one person wants something that the other person has.
Okay, so when one person has something that the other person has.
Wants, yeah.
So when you're in a situation where someone wants something, the other person has it. The bargaining. What else? How do you know you're in a negotiation?
Anytime you're feeling uncomfortable, somebody's trying to get something from you, you don't want to give.
Oh, that's good. That's a good point. Anytime you feel uncomfortable, there's a discomfort. You're feeling uncomfortable because there's trading. You're trading something, right? You're giving something, the other person's getting, right? And the question is, what's the value? Remember John Patterson? I'm always going to go back to him. Actually, John Patterson is like the founder of American sales. A lot of things you know about American sales. John Patterson, 1870, 1880, 1890, early 20th century is John Patterson. That's why I want to press that upon you. Feel free to go and Google him too, John Patterson. All right, one of the things that we got from The Art of War. Who's read The Art of War, Sun Tzu? Okay. The thing about, it's very interesting. Usually I go to business audiences about maybe half the room. So here, you mean you have a big part of the audience that hasn't read this? All right, but you're here in a negotiation seminar, so I would encourage you to go read The Art of War. Art of War has a lot of negotiation principles. Sun Tzu, and it's called The Art of War. Sun Tzu is in China, right? It's in ancient China, and he lays out this book on how to succeed in war. So here's a quote by Sun Tzu. He says, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." So the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Here's another quote by Sun Tzu. "Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting." All right? So the interesting part about this is, let's create an analogy. Let's call the negotiation similar to war. This is the war. This is the battle between buyer and seller, so to speak, right? And that any conflict that exists between buyer and seller is the negotiations, and let's call it the war, right? But what Sun Tzu talked about was, if you really, really are good, you can make things work without fighting. So it's similar to the John Patterson principle, which is to bargain a deal in your favor that's acceptable to the other side. Because if it's acceptable to the other side, then there's no fight, really, right? So the part that we're going to teach today, I'm going to show you a paradigm on how to set up these negotiations where there's really not a lot of fight on the other side, and if there is, it's minimal, but where the deal is kind of favorable to you, all right? And that comes from Sun Tzu. So three components of negotiating I'm going to show you. Now, before I get into that, there's a couple of paradigms of negotiating. And I want you to write this down because I think that if you know the paradigms of negotiating that exist on the other side, whether they're good or not, there's still going to be a paradigm that they follow. You know how to kind of like defend yourself in a sense, right? So, one paradigm of negotiating is, write this down, I win, you lose. I win, you lose. Now, in the I win, you lose paradigm, the other side is simply trying to get what they want at your detriment. I win, you lose. Now, you see in the world of business that litigation attorneys use this paradigm. I win, you lose. Very competitive. In fact, if you notice, who's been in a commercial litigation situation where they were fighting for a lot of money? Who here? Right. You too, right? And when you're in that situation, right, and you're talking to your attorney, what is it, right?
I represented myself and I won.
And you won. But you almost was in that environment, right? I win, the other side loses.
Which is why this goes everything against networking. Right there, what you just said.
Well, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I win, you lose. Who here has been in a contentious negotiation where they had to win, the other side had to lose, or you had to lose and the other side had to win? Who here who has been involved in that kind of conflict? Right? You. I win, you lose. Usually happens in litigation. You know what, it also happens a lot, you see it like with a guy like a Donald Trump, right? Someone who carries a lot of leverage. And if you hear, and I've studied Donald Trump, very competent negotiator, actually a good guy to study when it comes to negotiating because he's in the deal business. So it's a good person to study, right? Well, if you notice that his paradigm is always, I win, the other side loses. And he's fought some major battles with municipalities and other business moguls, and there's always fights. And the model is, I win, you lose. That's one paradigm, right? Now, the second paradigm is win-win. Now, we talked about win-win. Win-win. The orange. And win-win says, all right, you want the juice, the other side wants the peel. Right? But we talked about the weaknesses of that. Now, the problem with I win, you win is, you know what I learned about I win, you win, I win, you lose? You know what the problem is? The person who loses always is trying to figure out how to win. how to get back what they lost. Who here has seen the movie Carlito's Way? All right. Remember the conflict between Carlito and Benny Blanco? Who remembers that? Carlito is this gangster that asserts his prowess around the guy who's upcoming. And what winds up happening is there's a scene in the middle of the movie where he violently attacks this guy named Benny Blanco. And he throws him down the staircase. And he owns this nightclub. And Carlito's a former drug dealer who was imprisoned. And he got out of prison and he didn't want to be a drug dealer no more. So he wanted to be in the legitimate world. So he decided to own a nightclub. And this guy, Benny Blanco, is a guy that hangs out in this nightclub who used to get free drinks and free rides with the previous owner. Now Carlito's the new owner, and the new drug dealer and the old drug dealer, they conflict. And they have a physical altercation. And Carlito, with all his cronies around him, decides to act violently towards Benny Blanco and throws him down the stairs. And Benny goes down the stairs, but he doesn't kill Benny. There's no murder. They let Benny Blanco escape. And that's like the middle of the movie. So now from the middle of the movie to the end of the movie, Benny Blanco, this up-and-coming drug dealer who just got violated by this ex-drug dealer, is figuring out, how do I get my revenge? Now, as a witness, as a viewer to the movie, you're just looking at the movie. You don't really know how this is going to play out. Then at the end, Benny Blanco seems to catch up to Carlito and kills him. And what you realize is, wait a minute. Carlito overpowered Benny Blanco when Benny Blanco had no leverage. But this guy, Benny Blanco, spent the rest of the movie figuring out how I can enact revenge back on Carlito to kill him back. And that's the problem with I win, you lose negotiating. That even if you win, now you're dealing with an opponent that's probably going to look to get back at you. And it's almost unnecessary. Now the problem with win-win is that it only applies to certain situations. Like that orange example. Sometimes there's situations where I want the juice and my counterpart wants the grind, wants the peel. But the reality is that situation only applies to certain situations. So that's the problem with win-win. So what I'm going to show you today is, and these are the three components. I'm going to show you a concept called power negotiating. And it's a concept that's been promoted throughout the years. The father of power negotiating is a gentleman named Roger Dawson. That's the father of power negotiating. And he's an Englishman who actually went on the, he went worldwide and actually went to speak, and he preached a lot about negotiations. And not a lot of people really know about him, but he was a proponent of this concept called power negotiating. And what power negotiating is it's about where you actually set up the negotiations, how you set up the communication so that you can feel like you can duplicate what John Patterson said, which is bargaining positions that are favorable to you that are acceptable to the other side. So in other words, what we're going to talk about mainly throughout this program is how to set up negotiations in a way where you win, you get what you want, while making the other side feel like they got what they want. And that you're going to be an actual manager of this actual perception. And you're going to manage the negotiations in that way. So remember, so there's three components. So write it down. Three components to power negotiating. Three components. The first component is the mental inner game. And that's the psychology behind it. That's the psychology behind it. So the first component is the mental inner game. How you feel about yourself. The psychology behind it. We'll talk about that. The second component is how you actually set up the game. How do you set up the negotiation? Remember the art of war? That if that the most effective person in war is someone who doesn't have to fight? Well, that's setting it up. If you can set it up where there's no negotiations. My goal always is that, I'm in a kind of intensive business negotiation type of business. My goal is to have 80% of my negotiations not happen. And so I can focus on the 20% that does happen. Right? So in other words, if you can set it up where there is no negotiation, a negotiation doesn't take place, well then you're kind of exercising what Sun Tzu talked about of winning the war without fighting. And the only way you could do that is if you understand negotiation as a discipline. You can set it up where a lot of the transactions you conduct don't involve negotiations. And that's a negotiation in itself. But you set it up where you win without fighting, without negotiating, without conflict. Right? So that's what we're going to talk about mainly, the strategic setup. And then the third part, so there's the mental in a game, and then there's the strategic setup. The third part is the gambits. All right, now you're in a negotiation. You couldn't avoid it. You're in a negotiation. So what are the moves and the counter moves? And in chess, it's the gambits and the counter gambits. So let's talk about the mental inner game. Now, I have a question to the audience. Why do you think negotiations is one of those things that make people feel uncomfortable?
Because someone's got to lose. Someone's going to end up with the upper hand. Whether it's a win-win or a win-lose, someone's going to have a slightly upper hand in the negotiations. There is a power difference.
So there's a power difference from your standpoint. From the audience, what do you think are the components that make people feel uncomfortable with negotiating?
People don't like conflict.
People don't like conflict.
Lack of confidence.
Lack of confidence.
Yeah, knowing what you are negotiating for.
Knowing what you're negotiating for. What else?
Lack of skills.
Lack of skills. So you're saying some people know they don't really have skills in this area, but they know they're in a negotiation process. Someone said lack of confidence. Who said that? Lack of confidence, yeah. That's a real big part. So let's talk about the mental inner game. Now I'm going to give you some insight here. All right. Here's some insight. There's two components to the mental inner game. Then I'm going to give you some basic strategies of the mental inner game. But there's basically two basic components. Here's the components. The problem that people feel or the feeling that they feel with negotiations that's negative is that negotiations is not about people liking you. And it's not about people knowing you. And I'll even take it a step further. It's not even about people trusting you. It's about people respecting you. So when you're in a negotiation situation, the major goal is not for the other side to like you, trust you, or even know you. Now, that could be a benefit, and we're going to talk about that. That actually could be a weapon that you can use in your negotiations. But that's not the major focus. The major focus is for people to respect you. Now, this is a concept that's a little esoteric. What's the difference between someone respecting you and someone liking you? Can I get any feedback on that?
Yeah, I've got one of those. I've got a friend. You like her. She's great. She's a lot of fun. And she'll do whatever I tell her to do. You're a doormat. I'm a bad friend. I'm sorry.
This is very interesting. All right, so you don't mind me. I'll repeat this. So in other words, she has a friend. She likes her. She loves her. She adores her. If your car is stuck at the 495 at 2 in the morning on a Saturday, she'll call you. or you'll call her, and she'll pick you up.
Yep.
Yep?
Sure, that's a friend.
And that's a friend.
I would do that for my friend. I like push up.
But,
No,
but,
that's a little bit different.
wait. She said something that gives this crowd a little awareness. There's a part of her that doesn't respect her. That there's a difference between respecting somebody and liking somebody. And she used the word doormat. Meaning she doesn't see her friend as someone who is independent. Right? As someone who could stand up for what she believes in. She sees her friend as someone who's available when you need her. So you like her, you trust her, she's reliable, she's dependable in any given situation. But if you were going to go to war with her,
I wouldn't take Jamie to war.
and there was another country invading her, she'd be the last person on earth that you'd be fighting, right?
Yeah.
There's a distinction. Know you, like you, trust you, versus respect. So I want to give you the difference. Because in negotiations, know you, like you, and trust you is not that important. Now in networking, when you network, and even in some cases with regard to sales and marketing, that's all important. So I'm not trying to diminish the importance of people liking you or trusting you or knowing you, because that's certainly important. But now you're in a negotiation. And we talked about, well, when do you know when you're in a negotiation? And usually you know when you're in a negotiation when there's now a dispute with regard to the value that's being traded, right? So now the question becomes respect. So I want to give you a little insight with respect. Respect is normally about boundaries. The concept of boundaries. Now, the problem with negotiations is there's no rules. There's no rules of engagement. People just act the way they want to act. There's no rules. People make the rules. So the way you make the rules, if you set boundaries, then you are contributing to making the rules. Now, sometimes the other side has boundaries, and then you can make rules with the other side. But boundaries is really the rule. So I'll give you an example, very clear example. Marty, Sam, and I, we're looking to acquire a candy manufacturing company in the state of New Jersey. And it's located in Jersey. And what they do is they manufacture nuts and peanuts and raisins, and they have their own brand. And we're in the midst of a negotiation right now, thinking about acquiring this company as a business. So the owner has kind of submitted all his financial information. We've kind of got a gauge into what his sales are, how many employees he has, and we're kind of looking at the deal right now. So we made an initial offer of $3.5 million. The owner is kind of like at he wanted more, he wanted like $5 million. Now he's reduced his number to $4.5 million. He's going to include the real estate. We're kind of like bargaining. So our thought process is we're thinking about, so now we're at $4 million, which, by the way, would be an incredible deal for us because we think that the business might be worth over $5 million. But we're thinking about $4 million right now, and the owner is thinking about $4.5 million. So it's me, and it's Marty, and it's Sam, and we have another partner who's involved, and we're conceptualizing this negotiation. And we're thinking about to ourselves, well, wait a minute. If we could go to $4.5 million, and we could start investigating the company, and we could start verifying how much money this business actually makes, then maybe later on in the negotiation, we could renegotiate the price based on our findings. So this process of what we call due diligence is we investigate the company, and if we find something that we don't like, we might use that as a way to get the price down from 4.5 back to what we're thinking about, which is 4 million. Now that's a boundary. Why? Because we've agreed to 4.5, we've done the investigation, and now we have flexibility to go back downward. right? Now, I went to this event in the private equity space. This event, I think it's called the Mid-Atlantic Merger and Acquisition Association, and it's located in Manhattan. And the speakers, some of the speakers of representatives of private equity groups who buy companies for a living, who are a little larger than the companies that we're talking about, talked about how when they would look at a company and an owner would accept the deal, that when they went into the deal and they did this investigation that we're doing with this company, that the agents, the investment bankers who are representing the sellers, would kick them out of the deal if they decided to renegotiate the price after the due diligence. Which was very interesting to me because I was like, well, wait a minute, that's a boundary. So what they did was they set the negotiation up like this. Listen, we agreed on a price. We have all the financial information. You're going to do an investigation of this business. And rather than renegotiate, we're going to decide right then whether you're going to buy or not, but there will be no renegotiating. And if you try to renegotiate, we're kicking you out of the deal because we have 3 or 4 other suitors. Talk about respect, right? So this concept of boundaries. Normally respect is, Holly, right? Holly talked about the friend that she calls at 2:30 in the morning. Your car breaks down and you call a friend, right? Now, I'm not suggesting that the friend should not help you. But there are times where you just invade someone's boundaries. There are times where it might be inappropriate for you to go and get the friend inconvenienced just because you're inconvenienced. And that is actually the difference between liking someone and respecting somebody. And that's, have you ever gone to someone's house that you don't know? And you don't want to ask them for nothing? Who's been in that situation? You've been in someone's house you don't know, and you want a cup of coffee, but you don't ask, right? Oh, I won't ask for a cup of coffee. I don't even know these people. It's inappropriate, right? Who's been in that situation? Right? Well, who's been in your best friend's house and you jump into the house and you go into the refrigerator like nothing and you go and you start taking stuff? Who's been in that situation? Right? That's the difference between our boundaries. Now, in some cases, it's really harmless, but I wanted to point out the difference between boundaries. So a great example is, one of the things I've been studying is that when Germany, Adolf Hitler, in 1933 took power of Germany, and I was studying it because it was kind of like a negotiations that he set up. And this is what happened. Adolf Hitler was really a nobody in the early 20th century. This is a pretty fascinating story. Then he comes to power. He serves in the army. He does time in prison. And at some point, he gets involved with this Nazi political party, which is really not, he didn't invent the party. He got involved with the party. And at some point, he rises to power. And then he runs in 1933 as a candidate. But the Nazi party in 1933 in Germany did not have the majority vote. So what happened was he had to get a coalition party. The Germany National Party's People's National Party, it's called the DNVP. He had to get their cooperation as a coalition to win the election. So he wins the election, but he wins the election with the cooperation of another party, right? So then he takes control and he's elected as the Chancellor of Germany with the support of a second party outside the Nazi party. Now, when he takes power, the first thing he does is he pushes for something they call the Enabling Act. And it's called the Enabling Act of 1933, which actually bans any other political parties to be existent in Germany. And then he uses terror and violence against the party that actually helped him get into office and other parties. He actually has terrorists bomb and actually attack the offices, right, in order to gain control. But the problem is, see, he went right past the boundaries of his opponents. And when the general population accepted his behavior and gave him support, he was able to gain control. And that is what we're talking about, boundaries. When people go they go beyond the boundaries, it has major impact on the negotiations. And the reason why we let people go past our boundaries because we're more concerned about the other side liking us and trusting us and knowing us than respecting us. So there's this concept of boundaries, and this is all part of the mental inner game. All part, and it affects the negotiation. Now, by the way, who can figure out what this face represents? What two figures in history? Huh? All right, so you got Gandhi on this side. On the other side? Hitler. We got Hitler on the other side. So we talked about in the mental inner game that you saw it, right? It's a mix.
I like the guy on the bottom.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna talk the guy in the bottom. He's a good-looking guy. Is that me? There you go. All right, so here it is. You have Gandhi on the right, and you have Hitler on the left. Now, the first part we talked about in terms of the mental inner game is that oftentimes we feel we're conflict adverse. We want someone else to like us. And the problem in negotiations is that when you're conflict adverse, you're almost done in negotiations because to be successful in negotiations, you kind of have to like a good tussle. You have to like a good argument in a sense. You have to be able to stand up for what you believe in. So respect is more important than them liking you or trusting you. So that's in terms of your mind, the one thing that prevents you to do well in negotiations typically is your need to be liked, your need to be known, your need to be trusted. That hurts you in negotiations because that goes against the grain of trying to be respected. All right, that's the first part. But here's the second part. Now, the second part that really prevents people from really doing well in negotiations that's mental, comes from the psychology of Carl Jung. Who's heard of Carl Jung? Right. Carl Jung is basically the father of psychology. I mean, after Freud, he's basically the father of psychology. Probably no one else has come up with more theories in terms of human behavior than Carl Jung. So you can find kind of the answer in Carl Jung. So the second problem with negotiations is when people employ negotiation tactics, they typically feel uncomfortable. They feel like maybe they're deceiving the other side because they're getting what they want. There's a guilt that they feel inside because they were able to get what they want. So that actually affects their negotiations. It's amazing. They feel guilty because they actually got what they wanted. They wanted something, they got it, but then there's a feeling of guilt. Now, I did this seminar on negotiations in July. Remember, Brian? And there was a gentleman named Gene Brown, who's one of the principals of ABA, which is a networking group. Who's heard of ABA? And Gene came to me, and it was very interesting. He came to me. I have no problem. He was here. I actually thought he might have been here. And I'd say this because I think he'd appreciate it too. He came to me, and I said, Gene, what do you think? He said, the presentation was an A+. It was one of the better presentations I've heard. So I said, okay, good. You liked it. But he said, you know, there was a part of it that it didn't feel authentic. Like some of the information you shared, which is some of the information I'm going to share with you, right? It didn't feel authentic. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel like if I employ this strategy, that I would be a good person. And he told me that. I was like, now at first I'm like, what the heck is this guy talking about? This is negotiations. This is what you do. But then it made me realize, wait a minute, there's a psychology behind this. And the answer lies with Jungian psychology. So here's the process, and this is why Gene didn't feel comfortable with the strategies that I'm actually about to share with you. He didn't feel comfortable. There are two parts of our brain. One part is our conscience. I'll describe that. The other part is the intuitive part of us, right? So we laid out the characters. On the conscience part, let's call this the Gandhi part in us. Now, the conscious part of our brain is the part that's moralistic, the part that wants to be a good person. If you attend the synagogue or the church or the monastery, whatever, on Sunday or Saturday or whatever, or you're a part of a spiritual group or you're part of a Buddhism study class, whatever it is, you're exercising this part of your brain. The part of your brain that just wants to be a spiritual, good person that gives the world. Who's familiar with that part? Who feels that way sometimes, right? Saturday, Sunday arrives, and you want to serve. So this is the conscience part of us, right? So that's why we have Gandhi. Gandhi being like, or Mother Teresa, or you have figures, or Martin Luther King. You had figures in history that represent the idealistic part of this conscious part of your brain, right? But then you have the other part of your brain. And we have Hitler there as someone who sees control. Another figure would be like a Madoff. Someone who is slick. Someone who is, they're smart and they're intelligent, and they use this intelligence to gain power quick. And they're kind of like manipulative. And they're kind of like deceptive, right? And they use techniques. And they understand human nature in a certain way. So now there's this intuitive part of the brain. And Hitler or someone like a Madoff is like the extreme of someone that represents that part of the brain, right? So you have the Gandhi part of your brain, and then you have the Hitler part of your brain. And the key is to have an integration. The balance between street smarts and book smarts. The balance between being someone who's good in nature, but also someone who understands the darker side of human beings. So a good example would be, I meet a girl, and she's just mega attractive. She's hot, and I want to date her. And then I'm starting to see her, and I notice that her schedule, it's not a normal schedule. She doesn't work from 9 to 5. Or she doesn't work from 9 to 8. And she's all over the place with her schedule, and I don't notice. And I go and I talk to my brother. I say, I notice that, I call her at a certain time and she's never available. So then my brother, using this intuitive side, say, well, she's ultra attractive. Maybe she's a stripper. You might want to look into that. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute. Now, I'm thinking she's a nice girl. But my brother immediately jumps into this part of his brain and questions it. It's the darkest. So in other words, the intuitive part of our brain keeps us in touch with the darker side. The understanding that there are human beings there that might take advantage of you. And it prevents us from being purely naive. And the key is to balance these two. Because we all have these two. We have a part of our brain that's moralistic and wants to do the quote-unquote right thing. But then there's the part of us, this intuitive side, that wants to gain power and wants to gain control and wants to actually produce a certain level of result. And we want to use whatever tactics that are necessary to achieve that. So that's That's where these two parts. So in negotiations, what happens is, to really achieve a successful negotiation, you're probably more going to be on this part of the spectrum than this part of the spectrum. Because negotiations is about getting what you want. And to do that, you might have to use human psychology at this level. Now, if you're networking, Lorinda, you talked about networking. Networking is actually a discipline that's different. Now, Marty and I, we have a relationship with a woman, and Sam as well, with a woman named Cynthia Greenwald. Who knows Cynthia? I don't know if anyone here knows Cynthia. You know Cynthia, right? Now, Cynthia is an expert on networking. And she's an expert on how to manage your social capital, how to get the most out of your relationships, how to get referrals from those relationships. She's really, really incredible. I've gone to her training and I've seen her speak. Now, I was talking to her the other day, and we were talking about this, and she was kind of fascinated because in networking, it's the opposite of the intuitive. In networking, you're more here. You want the person to like you. You want the person to trust you. You want the person to give back to you, right? So it's kind of like more this part of the brain. But in negotiations, now you're in the midst of a negotiations, a deal, well, you're using more this part of the brain, right? So it's kind of like the opposite. And if you're conflict adverse and you feel uncomfortable with fighting for what you want, you're done. You're out the water. And what will happen is those boundaries that we talked about will be violated. So when Hitler in 1933 violated the boundaries of Germany, and it was accepted, he gained power. Then he invaded Munich. Then he invaded France and Poland. And he kept on violating boundaries. So by the time someone like a Stalin, who knows Stalin? Who's heard of Stalin? Do you know Stalin was one of the most powerful men in the world? And when he went to the negotiating table with Hitler, he was scared to death because Hitler had so much leverage because he kept on violating boundaries. And he had the power. So that makes a major difference in negotiations. So that's the mental in a game. So let's talk about some mental in a game concepts. Now I'm pretty big. I'm a big believer that if you got the mental in a game concept right and you got the strategic setup right, that 80% of the time you won't even need to negotiate. So that the strategies of the offensive strategies and the defensive strategies that I'm going to share with you are really not going to be needed if you got the mental game and the strategic setups part down packed. But let's talk about the mental inner game. Here's some concepts. So we talked about boundaries. We talked about exercising this intuitive part of your brain. First, there's about 7 principles. Mental in a game. Real quick, just understand it. Very important. 1, you got to see yourself. I mean, you just got to see yourself as a haggler, as a handler, as a pain in the ass. Who here is a pain in the ass for someone in their life? See my brother's girlfriend raise her hand. I'm assuming that it might be with my brother. 90%. Everyone here has someone in their life where they're just simply a pain in the ass. Right? So what I'm asking you to do is expand your network. Expand it, you know? Don't be a pain in the ass just with your wife. Be a pain in the ass with everyone. Not just with 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people. Start to question. Think about it. Think about it. If you're a pain in the butt with somebody, you usually question things. You usually don't take things at face value. You usually fight for what you want. So I'm asking you to expand that. Because if you see yourself as a deal maker, as a handler, as a haggler, you see yourself as someone who could be good in the negotiation process, then that mental component affects all your negotiations. So see yourself as a deal maker. Here's a second component to the mental inner game. This is a second suggestion. Negotiate all the time. Now, I have to admit, my brother now is exercising this because I see him every day. My brother, he's like I said, he's like a turnaround specialist. He works with clients and he works with a couple of companies that we have a more deeper interest in. So what he does is he jumps on the phone with suppliers and vendors and people that owe money to our clients, the people who our clients owe money to. And I just see him handling every day. Handling, haggling, and just negotiating all the time. And and when I look at him, I feel proud. I feel like he's doing a good job because he's negotiating all the time. So here's a principle. Negotiate all the time. All the time. What does that mean? Well, I'll give you an example. I had a friend in college, and he was just, I'll describe this friend. He was just really good with women. I mean, really good with women. So at the time, I was 18, 19 years old, and he was like maybe 29, 30 years old, so he was a little older than me. And every time I looked at him, he was with an attractive woman. And he did not have much money at the time. Later on, he became a lawyer. He became actually a pretty good criminal defense lawyer. He started making more income. But he didn't have a lot of money at the time. And he wasn't that good looking either. You wouldn't look at this guy as a guy and be intimidated by his looks. You'd look at him and say, wow, if he could do it, I could do it. That kind of guy. But every time I looked at him, he was with another attractive female. So one day, I'm 19 years old, and he's like 29, 30 years old, and I say, what is the secret? Why every time I see you, you're just with another attractive female? What's the secret? So he tells me, I have one secret. You have one secret. It's one secret. He says, I'm a flirt, but I flirt with all women. All women. I don't care if they're heavyset, if they're 70 years old. I'll flirt with my mother. I don't care. I flirt with all women because it's a part of who I am. I say, okay, you flirt with all women. So I say, what's the significance of that? Well, he said the significance of that is when I come across a woman that I'm really attracted to, or a woman who's really attractive and who's used to getting hit on by a lot of guys, I just act like myself. And that attractive woman looks at me as if I'm acting like myself. So I'm not putting on an act for her. I'm not changing my behavior for her. I'm just being me. So I looked at it, I was like, that's very interesting. So as I started to grow my development, I got into business, I started thinking, well, negotiations is very similar. In other words, if you negotiate all the time, then it's very natural when we're in a big deal to negotiate and to stand up for what we want. If we're the type of person that we're at the hotel and we're waiting online and we're at the Marriott and we were up the block from the Hilton and the Hilton charges $168 a night and you're charging $188, there would be no problem by saying, wait a minute, the Hilton says $168. Why are you charging $188? I'm about to go to the Hilton. And just bringing it up as an issue. That part. Now, that's not to say that you'll get the price down, but I'm just saying there's that part of you mentally that just negotiates all the time. One of the problems is that in this culture, everything is negotiated at the manufacturing and distribution level. Everything. So our everyday life, unlike other cultures, is not negotiating. So now we're in business and we're negotiating all the time. So that's one of the challenges to overcome. but we have to get used to negotiating all the time. And that also involves our personal lives. We talked about boundaries, right? Who here knows someone who has problems with in-laws? They're married, but the in-laws are horrible. Who knows somebody like that? I came across somebody recently. They said, you know what the difference between in-laws and outlaws? I said, what? Outlaws are wanted. Yeah, you're laughing. But those boundaries. Yes.
You say you should always be negotiating. I have a lot of lawyer friends of mine.
Lawyer friends.
They hate being lawyers. And one of the reasons they hate being lawyers is that they spend a good portion of their working day negotiating with people, fighting with people, whatever you want to call it, and it becomes debilitating after a while. It's get worn out and tired. It's like the security person who spends his day dealing with the slime of the world. And it's very hard not to think that everybody's the slime of the world.
Correct.
So you need a break because you can't just keep doing the same thing because it'll turn you into what you don't want to be.
Well, that's what we talked about, the conscious brain and the intuitive brain. And oftentimes when we're negotiating, we're exercising that intuitive brain that makes us, our conscious part of our brain, more uncomfortable.
The problem that we all have is dealing with someone who's corrupt.
Yes.
Okay? And you keep talking about this stuff, and I keep thinking about Mr. Putin and Mr. Obama.
Yeah.
And I'm saying if they're in a negotiation, I know who I want on my side.
There you go.
It's not the guy I got.
You know, people laugh. You know, it's funny. You took the words out of my mouth. No, Marty, my partner, took the words out of my mouth. I was actually going to pose a question when we had the Hitler and the Gandhi version, right? If we were at war and you knew we were getting invaded, would you want Gandhi to be the leader? No. Or would you want a guy like Winston Churchill to be the leader? Who would you want? And that's what I'm talking about, negotiations. In other words, there's these couple of components to our brain. And there's this times where we need to focus on what we want. And that's the part of our brain that we're exercising. You wouldn't want Gandhi in the middle of a war. And you got to know when you're in a war versus when you're in a situation where the conscious part of your brain is more effective. That's why I broke it into the two parts of your brain. At what given moment should you be exercising a certain part of your brain? So in the cases, if you're an attorney and you're in litigation, you know, the problem is you're probably exercising your intuitive part of your brain, and people are hiring you for that purpose.
It's even more frustrating because you're not negotiating for yourself. So you don't have the ability to control your client.
Right.
And oftentimes your client doesn't have the willpower that's necessary to achieve success.
Correct.
So it becomes extremely frustrating.
Absolutely.
Because you want to fight and you want to win, and they hold you back. Because they have a different image of themselves. You can't change people's images.
No, I agree. All right. So we talked about negotiating all the time. Here's a couple other concepts. Overcome the fear of losing relationships. People not liking you. We talked about that. When you're in a negotiation, it's really not about people liking you. It's about people respecting you. Now, here's the irony about this. The irony is that oftentimes you're in a negotiation and your friends, you know, we've been in this situation, me and my brother. You're friends on the guy on Tuesday, and the following Tuesday you're friends again. Your enemies on Tuesday, and the following Tuesday you're friends again. And I've always looked at that as interesting. So you're in the midst of negotiating, and you're fighting it out, and then the next couple of weeks you're friends again. And that has always made me realize that we should never really take negotiations that seriously. And maybe that answers your question, Marty. In other words, negotiations is nothing but a chess game. This is a game, and like any other game. I mean, if you played racquetball with your friends, and you were on the court, and you were playing against your friend, Anala, you're playing against your friend, racquetball or golf or whatever game it is, right? Think about it. You're there, when you're playing the game, what are you trying to do at that time? Win. But then after the game, what happens? You have a beer. I mean, it's not a big deal. So if we look at negotiations as nothing but a game, then it doesn't become that serious. Huh? You can't take it personally. So that's another component to negotiations. Don't take it personally. It's just a game. And like any other game, you're there to win. But then once the game ends, you return back to your normal, everyday life.
That's also a big, another big problem with win-lose negotiating is people take it personally.
Yeah.
It's hard just to negotiate, period, like Marty was saying, where you're just in action all day. It's like, after a while, you're like, what did I just do? And what did I win?
You want to get up to
Is the universe on my side? But that is a big problem. It's just the ability to cope with the after effects.
Yes.
But then again, I've negotiated with a barrel of guns in my head.
Well, that's a real negotiation.
Right.
Did you have your guns?
You said yes to everything, I hope.
That's when you surrender.
He was if he's here.
The thing is, I accepted that challenge. I knew that it could lead to this. I was taking someone out of a gang, and I knew it could lead to this. I knew it could lead to my death. I accepted it. Therefore, I could deal with it. Right now, I'm a senior director to the U.S. military. We have a lot of kids that come back home and can't deal with the realities of war. War is a negotiation like anything else.
Yes, of course.
You have to negotiate where you are, how you're feeling, what you're doing. Can I pull that trigger and kill that 19-year-old kid at the end of my battle?
Correct.
I have to, or I can't.
Correct.
Can I die? It's all about negotiations, but it's the level that you take it to. It's what you can accept, what you can't accept. A lot
Correct.
of people cannot do what I do. I can't do what a lot of other people can't do. I hobnob with a lot of generals, and they tell me war stories of how they killed people in battle, but they sort of, I get from them, to them it's a joke. Yeah, I had to put my knife through him, I stabbed myself in the army, but the knife went through his neck and got me in the shoulder. Here's my scar.
Right.
Holy, I'm 50-year-old. It's what you can accept. It's what you get yourself into. It's what mentally you are prepared to negotiate.
Yeah, and that's a good point.
Well, one thing you did it.
Mental
Look, you're
acceptance.
described your negotiation is very extreme.
Right.
And remember the intuitive part of the brain? Oh, you're totally in that realm. You're not on the conscious level of your brain. You're in the intuitive part of your brain if you're in that kind of negotiation.
Yeah, but he also said something about in terms of acceptance. If someone's a church goer, synagogue goer, you're good-hearted, and you do something that you know you're taking a little bit out of someone's pocket, so to speak, quote unquote. It's hard for you to go through the weekend. It's not easy.
Well, that's why one of the prescriptions of trying to get over this mental part is just looking at it as a game. You wouldn't feel that way about the racquetball game or the tennis game or any other game you play. And that typically in business, negotiation is just a game. And it's a game that John Patterson talked about, which was making a deal favorable to you that's acceptable to the other side. And that's what manages the conflict. Again, in the disciplines, the various business disciplines have, certain mantras attached to it. And in networking, like my colleague, Cynthia, preaches the concept of know you, like you, trust you. And in negotiations, it's about respect.
I want to make a comment on that. You got to know when you're going out to play golf or when you come in to play football. And And the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes even in the lightest negotiations, people come in too strong, and in the heaviest negotiations, people come in too light. Not to say that one is, that might be warranted for that particular situation, because that person might be known to be tough, even if it's something light. But you gotta play the sport for what it is. You gotta treat it like a day. If it's a rainy day, bring an umbrella.
In any negotiation, when you're walking into a room, if you see somebody and you're talking to them, and you want to kind of take on their persona, you don't want to go in, if you're a giddy person, you don't want to be in there to be very giddy, so you might be more serious. So you kind of need to feel out emotionally, mentally, and visually what that person is and their body language. You're kind of aiming into a point, and so you can relate. Now you can start negotiating. Very hard for someone to go to negotiate with someone who's like this. You're coming in, they're all happy and.
All right,
you seem like a true good networker.
That's
what it is.
Yeah.
Let's move on, and now I'm going to show you. See, the thing is that, as we talked about, negotiations is supposed to be a tool that you use to manage relationships, enhance profit. So there's a way that you can negotiate where the relationship's not necessarily affected. Or even if it's affected, it's very temporary. So we're going to talk about that. So a couple other concepts. Overcome the fear of losing relationships, of people not liking you. This is mentally. You got to overcome that. And you have to think in terms of, no deal relationship is just that important. I know this is hard for people to really realize, but when you really think about our lives, who has people in their life where they had a friendship that fell out? They just got destroyed. Who has a situation where they had a best friend or a relative or a family where the relationship was destroyed, right? Now, who here had that situation, but then maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years later, it got repatched? Who has that situation? Where you was able to repatch that same relationship that fell apart, but then that relationship came back to fruition. Who's had that experience? Raise your hand. Yeah. So I think, the interesting part is that when you really think about it, a lot of relationships, they fall apart and they come back together. And sometimes because you stood up for yourself and you took a position that was strong, that was in your best interest, that later on the other side accepts it over time anyway. So if you have the mentality, really, a lot of people come in and out of your life. We shouldn't attach that much importance. I mean, there are certain relationships that are really super important. Your father, your mother, your daughter, your son, there's certain relationships that are super important. But in the grand scheme of things, right, everyone's here, right? Everyone made it. And everyone's had relationship fallouts. So to have that fear is really not necessary. And that fear typically hurts a lot of negotiations. It hurts your progress in negotiations. Well, that's why we're talking about the mental part. See, it's the mental part that keeps us from doing. And that's why we're spending time.
But the other thing that you really never know is the ability of the person you're negotiating with. Unless you somehow you find someone to do some research, you don't know this person. And you're dealing with Donald Trump, like you said at the very beginning. The ability to walk away makes you the winner. You can walk away from anything. I can't walk away from anything.
Well, we're going to talk about how to work under those circumstances. A couple other things, and here's a good thing. See yourself as the person who has the leverage, whether you have it or not. So again, one thing about negotiations is that it's the one discipline that exposes your self-esteem. And if you see yourself as someone who has the leverage, someone who has the value on the table, you just see yourself as that person, then you'll always negotiate from a high range. I mean, Marty, we always have that. Me and my brother, we're kind of like, we always negotiate from a high range. And sometimes we find our own partner trying to negotiate us down because we're negotiating from such a high range. But if you negotiate from a high range, when you land, yeah, sometimes. But the thing is that when it lands, and when negotiation lands, you usually land in a very high position because you started so high, and we're going to talk about that. But a lot of it is mental, because if you see yourself as valuable, You see your service as valuable. You see you as someone who's really, really helping out, and that your value ought not to be compromised. Then mentally that helps you manage the negotiation range. And then a couple other concepts. When you have the leverage, though, don't abuse it. That humility is something that helps you actually manage your negotiations more effectively. So when you have the leverage, just be humble about it. Because if you have the leverage, you have the leverage. The leverage will speak for itself. So be humble about it. And finally, always maintain professionalism and self-respect. All right, so let me talk about the strategic setup. All right, and we talked about before is how do you know you're in a negotiation? And here's the thing. Here's the thing that we've learned about negotiations. The first thing that happens is we talked about trading value. And John Patterson talked about trading value in your favor that's acceptable to the other side. So you're trading value, right? And we talked about the art of war, where if you could set it up where negotiation is not even needed, then that's even the most ideal part. But here's the part that I normally see. You have a buyer and you have a seller. And when you're a buyer and you're trying to negotiate, what's the major issue you're trying to hit on? What's the major issue? Price. And when you're a seller, what are you trying to promote? Value. So a negotiation typically is a buyer trying to eliminate all issues but price, and a seller trying to promote value. So if a buyer could just make everything about price, what has he avoided? He's avoided the negotiation in a sense. He's gotten the price. Now he's making it about price, and now he can get the price down, and it's one issue. Right? Now, a seller, the seller's talking about value, right? So what's he trying to avoid? Price. So if he focuses on the value, then he could frame the issue in a way where the negotiation is in their favor. So in the strategic setup, typically you're going in and it's the buyer trying to reduce it to price and the seller trying to reduce it to, or trying to frame the issue or present his value proposition, right? Now, as a buyer, if I could reduce it to price, or if I can convince the other side that their service is intangible, meaning there's really no way I can measure the results of what you're selling, then he gains an advantage. But if the seller could present his value and kind of promote the results that will happen as a result of buying from him, then he gains an advantage. So we had a seminar in Manhattan, and it was a seminar.
I'm sorry, I can't see what the writing is. You're making me nuts. We're both doing.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Here out here.
Okay, no
Sorry.
problem. So we had a presentation in Manhattan, and there was a concept that we promoted that stated something very simple. Never sell the product or the service or the benefit. Never sell the product or the service. Always sell the result. Try to tangibilize what the result is. So my brother's girlfriend has a cleaning company. And it's a residential cleaning company. And she has lots of clients. In fact, one of her clients is Dwight Gooden from the New York Mets. Who's heard of Dwight Gooden? Okay. That's one of her clients. So she sends...
And I'm trying to hone it in.
Would have been better in the 80s, but we got Dwight Gooden. His fastball's not 95 miles an hour no more, but we'll take him.
I'll give him a
Yeah. So, she has Dwight Gooden as a client, right? So she's in the residential cleaning business. Now that's quote unquote a commodity, service. Now, in a commodity service situation, you normally jump to price. But if she was in front of a client and she says, listen, I charge what I charge, but if you hire me, all I could tell you is that your floors will be immaculate, your rooms will be immaculate, I'll make sure that my workers here are on time at 8 o'clock in the morning. As a result, you will be, your house will be ultra clean, all right? There's going to be ultra reliability. Our workers are going to be very dependable. So I don't know about price, but this is going to be the actual result of it. Then she's in a power position because she's not competing on price. She's actually competing on what will happen as a result of being hired. So there's a concept called always sell the results. Don't sell the product or the service. Just sell the results. Because the results now is not a tangible, it's not a commodity. The results is the results. Not even the benefits. The benefits are the benefits. The results is what happens post-sale. What happens post-sales? So an immaculate house is the result. Huh? But she has to sell the result. If she knows how to produce that, and she has 10 other clients where she's produced that for, she needs to be promoting the results.
It's not all the same. The results aren't all the same.
They're not all the same, but at the end of the day, each client is different, but if you sell results, it's easier to get the other side to see the value. All right? But if the other side's trying to reduce you the price. So in a negotiation, if you set the tone and you're selling the results. So Lee Munch, actually she's a colleague of mine. Now in addition to being a colleague of BizGro, she has a business coaching practice. Now a business coaching practice is kind of like an intangible service, right? So you go to clients and say, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm going to coach the clients and I'm going to help you grow your business. But if you go to a client and you say, I have 10 clients, and on average they've increased their sales by 30% in year one, and here are my case studies, and this is what's happened, and you see that out of my 10 case studies, we've worked with different industries. Well, now you're producing the results.
Well, there's more than just results. That's key. However, there's also more than that. It's also you're going to get the money, but you're also going to be home for dinner. My whole thing, I'll get you home for dinner, but if your wife doesn't want you there,
either or. My point is whatever the results are. So if the results are you're working 80 hours a week, and now as a result of my efforts, I'm going to cut your work time in half. Those are results. So in these negotiations, as we set it up, the seller should be talking in terms of results. The buyer, though, let's just say we were training you to buy, reduce it all the price. So if you reduce it to price, you try to get a better deal. If you're a seller, you reduce it to the results so you can present the value so you can get a lot more value in return, and you eliminate price as an issue.
but you still have to be apples. The problem that I find with a lot of people is that it's got to be apples to apples prices. So Jack Scratch chart, but it doesn't even matter what it is, right? Car insurance, that's what Geico, charges X, and you can go to State Farm, they're charging Y. But when people are looking at the price, but the bottom line is, what happens when you actually get an accident? They're not.
Well, this is what I'm talking about, the results. If I'm an insurance salesperson, what I want the information I want armed with is what happens after the accident. So if there's statistics that support that my company will actually insure situations that another company wouldn't, and the statistics that support even paying a little higher premium for that extra security, I want to present that. Most salespersons are not as sophisticated to do that. So in your case, as coaching, you want to go and be very specific in terms of what you're presenting. What you're presenting. You have a specific value proposition, and you have 10 clients, and you say, I have one client that increased their sales by 20%. I have another client that actually reduced the amount of hours he puts in his business from 80 hours to 30 hours. And then I have another client that, you know, they didn't increase their sales, but because of our management of expenses, they were able to double their profits. So you're talking in terms of results. If you sell results, what happens is you don't have any competition. Because you have results, you're supporting the results, you're presenting the results, there's no competition, typically. But if you reduce the price, then you have all these competitors. So when you try to set up a negotiation, buyer, if you're buying, you always try to reduce it to price. If you're a buyer, so like my brother, he represents this food manufacturer, and he looks at 10 vendors. And he's comparing the vendors' prices. So when he talks to the vendors, he's talking in terms of price. And he's reducing them to the price. And if they go along with his conversation, now he has an edge in the negotiations because he's framed the issue with regard to price. But if I'm a seller, I'm the other side, and I'm now competing with my brother, and I say, wait a minute, yeah, you're right, you could get a cheaper price there, but here are some statistics that will show that you going with that vendor will actually make you lose money, because here's the results that you will achieve by going with us. You understand? So it's all about framing the issue. You got to frame the issue properly. So that's part of the strategic setup. So let's talk about 8 concepts of the strategic setup. Now, in this power negotiating concept, now we talked about the 3 paradigms. One is, I win, you lose. The other is win-win. What we're talking about here, though, is a methodology of negotiating where you negotiate will help you manage the relationship properly, like John Patterson. It'll help you win while making the other side feel like they won and making the negotiation a lot smooth. So, Lorinda, you talked about networking. This is very critical for you. If you could adopt a negotiating style to get what you want while still maintaining the relationship, then you have you've actually achieved what you want, which is the relationship intact but getting what you want. So that's why these skills, these communication skills, are very important. Well, I'm going to go into it and I'll explain every single one. One, here. First thing, always ask more than what you expect. Now, why do I say that from the audience? Why do I say always ask for more than you expect?
You can always go down, but you can't go up.
You can always go down, but you can't go up. What else? Why do I say always ask for more than you expect? Look at this. You may actually get it.
You always have to expect people to negotiate. So you have to leave some room so that you can manipulate them a little bit and make them think that they want something.
All right, good. So there's been 3 ideas that have been shared. So one idea is, one, you might get it. Second thing, get the other side to name the price. I think that's important. But it's a little overrated because if you ask more than what you expect, then it's not that important to get the other side to name the price, because that's one of the famous things. Get the other side to name the price.
That's not always logical, and I'll give you an example, is real estate. Okay, you can't tell someone, you know, hey, just tell me what you want to pay for this. You've got to set the boundaries first.
Can you ask what's your price range? Show you the price.
Well, you start that before you show the house, but when you show the actual house, you're going to say, this house is $425,000. And I'm going to say, well, how much do you want to give me for it?
Yeah, but the problem is if you don't ask for more than what you expect, then against that egotistical buyer, if you ask for 10 and you expect 7, the egotistical buyer, if you ask for 7, will take you down to 5. So in preparation for that, you want to ask for more than what you expect. You understand? So that's why there's three concepts. One, you might get it, right? Two, it's a defense against the egotistical buyer. Now, when I say the egotistical buyer is someone who has pride in the negotiation skills. All right, so that's the egotistical buyer. Right? So asking more than what you expect actually gives you defense against that kind of buyer. Also, you might get it. So if you get it, then you made extra money and you created more value. Here's another concept is never accept the first offer. Okay? So even if you are, you like the offer, one of the concepts is if you accept the first offer, what do you create on the other side? Just some feedback.
They have the leverage.
Huh?
They have the leverage.
If someone makes an offer and you accept it, what do you think what kind of communication have you created?
That they want.
You'll take anything.
That you'll take anything? Anyone else? If someone makes an offer and you accept it right away, what are you communicating to the other side? Who said that?
I could have gotten more.
I could have gotten more. So that's one of the things. So if you accept the first offer right away, the other side feels I could have gotten more, and therefore the transaction that you negotiated is in jeopardy, because they might actually go for more as a result of you going and accepting the offer right away. So that's another concept. Concept 4, create multiple issues in the negotiation no matter what. So if you have multiple issues, see what happens is, remember I talked about the candy manufacturer that we're looking to buy. Well, we made an issue of price. We also made an issue of financing. We made an issue of seller consulting. There was about 6 or 7 issues that we made issues of. They weren't necessarily all issues, but we laid it out so that we have issues that we could actually trade off. And that we can negotiate and trade off. So that's one of the keys. Always have a higher authority. This is the key concept. One of the issues about a higher authority is if you're a solopreneur and someone makes an offer and they think that you're just alone, that's a mistake because then they're just going to beat you up. But if you say, you know what, let me run it by my team and I'll see what they think about, then you could go back to the other side and actually present the ideas. You could actually say, you know what, I ran it by my team, but they don't really like it that much. Let's try to restructure this. So you don't have to be the bad guy all the time or the bad girl. You can always take it to someone else and then you present it.
So Lorinda, there's your answer there. You've got to find someone that you can bounce it off of before giving them an answer. Oh, I know the people that you
That's
do.
why my business has got to go outside the networking world and my friendships and conventions.
Yeah, well, networking, like as we stated, networking and negotiations is 2 different things. Couple more things. One of the things is indifference. Being too excited about a deal is not a good thing. The key thing is to always be level-headed and be indifferent. If you show the other side that you're too excited, what are you showing the other side? That you want it. And when the other side thinks you want it, what's their tendency to do? Haggle or reduce the value that they receive. Couple key concepts. And these are concepts that are based on human nature. One is the law of scarcity. The law of scarcity states that the value of your services deplete once you provide them. Right? Or actually, no. The law of scarcity actually states that the more available your service is, or the more available a product is, the lower the value. And that the less available it is, the higher the value. So if if you present the product and you say, you know what, there's not really much left of this, then the value goes up. But if you say, but if they have the perception that it's available, then they're not really willing to pay a lot for it. So that's what the law of scarcity says. So when you promote something, you always want to, in your marketing, always in a subtle way, say, you know what, this price, this offering, this concept is not really available for a long time. It's kind of like this event. If we promoted the event and we say seating is limited, then we're kind of using the law of scarcity to our advantage. The second concept is the hooker principle. The hooker principle states that the value of your service depletes over time once you provide it. Now, who here knows why the prostitute asks for her money up front? Who could answer that question? Who could articulate why the prostitute wants the money up front?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Once the service is
Services
rendered,
may not be there.
they won't pay.
Listen, you can answer this question. What happens at Capital One stays at Capital One.
Negotiations are still open until they take the money.
Yeah, exactly. So, who can articulate? Why does the hooker ask for her money up front?
Because once services are rendered, the demand is no longer there.
Once the services are rendered, the demand is not there.
Or the value that is perceived is not as good as what is delivered.
That, you know what, that is a good point. Keith, right? In other words,
The desire to purchase isn't there anymore.
yeah. Once a service is provided, then there's really, the desire is not there no more. So you were excited about the service at one point, and then later on, once it's provided, you think to yourself, oh, that's it?
I mean, to make it a PG rated, it's the same with an attorney.
Yeah.
For a retainer up front.
A retainer up front.
But if I make that phone call and I get the deal done, they're like, oh, now I have to pay you $1,000 for that? You made a phone call.
Correct.
Right? So that's the Disney version.
Correct. Is that Disney? Did I make it off? The point being is that that's why in business situations it's important, especially if you're a service provider, to establish the price of something up front. Because if you don't establish it up front, then later on they'll figure out a way to renegotiate the deal based on how they feel later on.
Back to the law of scarcity. Have you ever been in a negotiation where you're using that tactic against you?
Say that again?
The law of scarcity.
Uh-huh.
Supply and demand.
Uh-huh.
Or what you had being more rare, being of more value. You ever been in a negotiation where that worked against you?
Well, that's why we mentioned it. It is something that will work against you.
Right. Well, obviously, supply and demand.
Wait, listen. You're a buyer and you're a seller. A seller is always trying to convince a buyer that what he's selling is scarce.
Right.
A buyer is always trying to convince a seller of what he's selling is readily available. And that's what influences the negotiation pitch. So that's why we talk about the law of scarcity, is you want to use the law of scarcity advantage. The hooker principle.
But have you ever had the law of scarcity backfire on you, is what he's asking.
Oh, absolutely. If the law of scarcity is if you don't project the message that your service or your product is not readily available, if you don't have that in your marketing, if you don't have that in your presentation, if you don't have that in your presentation of your company, then it could work against you.
But if you say that it is scarce, what he's asking, okay, has that worked against you?
Of course. Oh, no. If it's scarce, it never works against you. It works for you.
Let me use a more concrete example.
Okay, talk about it.
An individual is soliciting service from a client, right? And places a business proposal in front of him and presents it. The deal that he places in front of this business owner is only valid for X amount of time. That business owner sees this time frame and thinks, whoa, hold on. I don't want to keep put under pressure right now, so instead of even considering your service, I'm gonna then think about something else right now and not even think about it, and then maybe even miss that opportunity of that deal.
Let me kind of put it.
Yeah.
You have to put time in on
Granted, of course, but then my exactly everything fluctuates, everything's dynamic, and that's my question when it comes to the law of scarcity. I mean, is then how do you work with the dynamic pricing and deals that you can offer with that law of scarcity without scaring away your potential client?
All of a sudden, you decide to do an extension on the top.
All right, let me try to go
Yeah, but then
into.
you do extension after extension.
Wait, let me try to answer. Let me try to answer this.
Go ahead.
If the buyer perceives your product or service as scarce, what he's thinking is that what you have available is not readily available in the marketplace. Therefore, he's willing to pay higher. If the buyer thinks that what you're selling is readily available, then he's willing to pay lower. You understand? If what he thinks is what you're selling is a commodity, he'll pay lower. If he thinks your product or service is scarce, he's willing to pay higher.
So essentially, the deal that I propose, he thinks he can get it at any time that he wants. So the time frame is like, oh, it's okay.
It's okay. But if he thinks that your offering is not readily available, he's more urgent to pay.
Now, do you have a specific tactic in negotiations to create that sense of urgency?
Well, it's how you establish the value proposition up front. So if you establish the value, your product or your service as something that's not readily available in your verbiage and the way you present, then you have an edge in negotiations. But if you let the buyer frame the issue on you, then they're going to have their way with you on price. That's like the concept of an RFP. Who here who's been in part of an RFP? In fact, Arnaldo, you're in the government contract business. So what's an RFP? The RFP is the government, right? Particularly, a lot of it is government. Some of it is large corporate contracts, right? They're basically rounding up a bunch of suppliers, and they're basically telling the suppliers, bid. So what do they say? They're saying all the use are the same, and the lowest price gets the contract. So they're framing the issue. But then there are certain companies that will not participate in an RFP. They refuse to do it because they don't want the other side to frame them as a commodity service. So that, correct. So that's the law of scarcity, the hooker principle. Information is power. Always, if you're negotiating something, always know what the marketplace looks like, always. And with regard to, there's a final concept that I think is important. Never negotiate with terrorists. What's a terrorist? Now, it's an international negotiation, a principle called never negotiate with terrorists. And the principle is a terrorist is someone who wants to demean you, who wants to hurt you, who wants to do harm on you. So if they want to do harm on you, they want to demean you, then negotiations is not something that's going to be the advantage. Show them that you're willing to fight and engage in a fight until you get what you want, and then you might gain a certain level of respect and they'll stop fighting. But don't negotiate with terrorists. It's not really it's not something that's to your best advantage. So remember, when I say terrorists, I mean someone who has screwed you for money, or someone who has deceived you or lied to you. All right? Real quickly, I'm going to go into the gambits and the counter gambits. All right, these are the moves. So you've gotten past the mental in a game, and you've gotten past the some of the principles, some of the strategic setup principles. So here's some gambits and counter gambits. So here's the offense, and I'm going to give you the defense. So this is the offense, and this is how you respond to it. First step, test for validity. Someone makes an offer. They say, I'm willing to pay X, right? The way you test for validity is you simply say, I'm not willing to pay X. I'm going to sell this for $500. I'm not willing to buy it for $500. I'll pay $400. So it's that testing for validity and how much time will go past before someone makes a concession. So it's called test for validity. 2, and the response, by the way, for someone who's testing you for validity is test for validity back. They offer 500, you say, I'm not offering anything less than, anything more than 400, and there's a validity test between the two ranges. Who will accept what? 2, some people are really, now this comes to, Lorinda, this comes to now networking. If the person likes you, and you make friends with them, I have found it from my experience that it's harder to negotiate with them. Who finds it difficult to negotiate with people they really like? It's really difficult to negotiate with people you really like. You have a deal and you want something, but you like them, so you're compromised in a certain way.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that instead of negotiating, you then talk with them, because they're your friend, they're your business networking partner. They work with you, not against you, whereas negotiations are one person against another. So it's not even...
Well, not necessarily. You're working out a deal, like Anala, right? We like each other, right? Now it's time to go and work out something. Let's just say I wanted to buy a company. Now we're in a negotiation. But if we really liked each other, wouldn't it be harder to address the issues? You know, it'll be a little harder. Depends. But my point is that
You're going to not apply a lot of what you're teaching. You're not going to go in and put extra money on that.
yeah, my point is if you like them, it's harder to be a little tougher for what you want. It's just a little, or face the conflict adversity.
The flip side of that coin, one of my biggest clients, very, very wealthy person, whom I adore. I love this guy. I feel comfortable going to him. Eddie, listen, I need X amount. It's a little more than the market bears, but hook me up. We're good like that. And I got it.
Well, that's my point. When you like somebody, they typically, the negotiation range caves in. Well, in that case, you did. Correct. Point is that if you make friends, it's a great way to avoid negotiations. But the counter gambit to that is to separate business from friendship at all times. So if you're able, one of those people that, hey, Gianna, you're my brother's girlfriend and I love you. But now we're talking business, and we got to talk business. I mean, I love you. You're my baby. We're always going to hang out. But now we're talking business, and in business, my company has to make a profit. So here's where we need to be at. So I'm acknowledging the fact that we have a personal relationship, and I'm trying to separate out the business and the friendship. And I plant the deficit of that. I say, listen, and I'm really affectionate with her. And I remind her that I care about her and that I love her and that we're friends. But this is business. All right? But as an offense, someone will take advantage of the fact that they're friends with you all the time. They're friends with you, and meanwhile they're trying to take advantage of you. Your own friend is trying to take advantage of the fact that they're your friend. So that's this concept. So if on offense, you make friends. On defense, you separate friendship and business. Third step, there's a concept called planting deficits. And this is tied into the law of scarcity. The deficit is, and we talked, right? You talked about scarcity. And you said, well, if someone convinces me that what they're selling is not readily available, they could charge higher. So it's the concept of scarcity. So I want to plant the deficit. I want to say, Arnaldo, hey, what we offer, you're not finding nowhere. You're not finding nowhere. What we offer, how about this? Go on the internet, find it, and when you find it, let me know. That's a concept of planting deficits in your mind. Doubt in your mind that the deal that I'm offering you is even available. But the other side, right, is maintain composure and probe and plant deficits back. Plant the deficits back. You say, Another's now coming to me and say, well, listen, your service is a special service, but I did go on the internet and I found these 2 other companies. So that's what we're talking about. 4, the concept of flinching. Flinching. Who's heard of flinching?
You wanna know what it is?
Yeah, flinching.
You pull back. You show
Weakness.
Huh?
You exhibit weakness.
Flinching is when someone makes an offer, you kind of emotionally react to it. So if someone says $500, you say, $500? You're crazy. $500? And just by that natural reaction, you lower the other side. The other side loses motivation to actually go and sell you at a certain price. So flinching is a reaction to what you're offering. So it's kind of like an emotional reaction. So Ronaldo and me, we might be talking and say, I'll buy your company for $3 million. And Ronaldo says, $3 million? You're absolutely crazy. I wouldn't sell it for any lower than $6 million. So it's a flinch that places doubt on the other side. And the counter gambit to flinching is make the concession inconsequential. Don't even pay attention to it. So even if he comes back and says, if I say $3 million and he says, I'm not selling for anything for $6 million, I'm not even paying attention to that. I'm ignoring that. I'm not letting that affect what I want. Couple other quick, and like I said, after this we're done. Trade-off methodology. I talked about making multiple issues in a negotiation. Very important. Answer a concession with a concession. Sometimes people grind it out and they keep on asking you for concessions and concessions and concessions and concessions. And the best way to answer them is answer them with a concession. Keep on letting them know that if they keep asking for concessions, you're going to ask for concessions back. So that's a key there. Higher authority. When someone makes an offer, never accept it. Just say, listen, let me take it back to my friends, let me take it back to my colleagues, I'll run it by them, and we could discuss it. Never be pressured that you're alone.
What has we made that day, that meeting?
Huh?
A lot of deals that we made at the table that day.
Yeah.
So we just get a phone call.
There's no rush.
It's not like you're gonna come back the next day.
Correct.
Sometimes you don't have an option.
So when someone makes an offer, just say, you know what, that offer looks good, but let me run it by my partners. Let me run it by the board. Let me run it by my advisory board. Even if you're a solo entrepreneur, you have an advisory board. You always create a higher authority. Good cop, bad cop. Right? It's a popular technique, but it's very effective. In other words, usually I look for good cop, bad cop when there's 2 partners or multiple decision makers. One side's the bad guy, the other side's the good guy. So one side wants your proposal, but the person who wants it says, you know what, Arnaldo tells me, I like your proposal, but my partner's really not that crazy about it. You know, and the other partner, he's like neutral. And I have to convince both partners to take the deal. So give me some time to try to get them to take the deal. Then he comes back to me and says, you know, I've been talking to my partners, and I like it, but they don't like it. So let's see if we can compromise. Now the problem is, Arnaldo and the 2 partners are on the same team, whereas with me, I'm on the opposite team. So the counter gambit is to always assume that Arnaldo and the other people are in the same team. Don't think that Arnaldo is trying to strike a deal for you on behalf of his partners. So I might come and say, listen, Arnaldo, I hope you're not playing good cop, bad cop on me. I like you, but I'm just assuming that you and your partners are all on the same team. Why don't we get everyone on board? Why don't we all sit down and we'll talk and try to hammer out a deal? The assumptive clause, always assume that they're going to take your offer. So when you make an offer, you always put it in writing and you have like a signature in the bottom, and you always assume that they're going to take your offer. It's kind of like an assumption that a deal will take place. There's a couple more concepts. One concept I'll go into, I'll go actually 2 more concepts and then we'll stop. One is this is, and this is why I talk about the intuitive brain. On a lot of negotiations, I've seen disappearing acts. Who's ever experienced that? You're in a negotiation, and the person you're negotiating disappears. And yeah, and when they disappear, right? What do? They're actually, what kind of power are they demonstrating to you?
They're not showing up values, they're not interested.
They're demonstrating walkaway power. They're actually demonstrating the ability to walk away from that deal. So one of the counter gambits to disappearing acts is just to simply disappear yourself and get other buyers to work on other deals, because that's a key component. And one final thing is that I want to discuss is the conditional contract. Who here has worked with buyers from other countries? You know, immigrants or people, or who does international business? So there's a couple of people here, right? You do international business, right? This is the major difference that I noticed from immigrants versus Americans. Americans tend to value the contract, right? So whatever's in contractual form, we want to kind of stick to the contract. Whereas I noticed people from other countries, typically, the contract is only as good as the conditions when the contract was negotiated. So if the conditions change, they tend to try to renegotiate the deal. You know, in other words, when we negotiated a deal, it was 95 degrees, now it's 70 degrees. Let's try to see if we could renegotiate this deal. And that's the difference between, I think, negotiation with Americans versus negotiation with people from other countries. It's kind of like a universal principle. So understand that if you're negotiating from a contract, you stick to the contract. But the other side might use the conditions as a way against you. So it's just that constant battle. So those are the things. Just a couple things. I'd like to get some feedback from the audience. Any takeaways as we conclude this? Because our time is out. Who has one or two things they kind of took away from this?
No win-win.
No win-win?
No win-win.
What particular about that is?
There's just no win-win. You're not looking for the win-win. You're looking for the no win-win. You're looking for the win. How do you lose?
Although that's not, we would talk about you win, but the other side has to accept and feel good about it too. That's where we really want, because if it's you win and they lose, remember we talked about they might try to get revenge on you and get it back. You were saying, Brian?
You started to touch on, setting the stage is important for where you're negotiating. Having a little bit more control in how that or where that takes place. I think I can leverage in some way.
Okay. What else? All right, we're gonna stop. Thank you for spending some time.